Pro Wrestling, everybody. We are talking about more AEW news because AEW probably had, it's hard to say if it is, but it's one of the best episodes of AEW Dynamite of this year. Maybe one of the best episodes of AEW Dynamite since the show started several years ago. And I have to say, I was quite impressed. And this is the way AEW kind of goes. They'll have, 1 or 2 weeks of these really awesome shows, and you're like, AEW's back to where it was back in 2020, 2021. And then they'll have a couple weeks which aren't bad weeks, but they're just okay weeks, like last week's was. But this undeniably was one of the best Dynamites, one of the best TV episodes of wrestling that I have ever seen. It was a lot of fun, and we're going to get into it here in the review. Some of the biggest highlights I'm going to cover. Obviously, first, right off the bat, Miro returned to AEW. Miro and ThunderRosa, by the way, both showed up, surprise showings in the backstage area, both of them heading into Tony Khan's office to talk to Tony Khan. No doubt, once you start selling 60,000 tickets and there's rumors that you might have $1 billion TV deal over the next 5 years and a brand new 2-hour show, there are people who probably want to come back to work. So that's what's going on right now with all of that. Tony Khan then later announced that he's going to have another announcement next week because legally he can't announce anything for it until the upfronts from Warner Discovery, which are happening next Wednesday and that night on Dynamite. They're probably going to announce this Collision show. It does look like this Collision show is going to be, if you don't know it, a unpublicized brand split. That's what a lot of people have been rumoring and suggesting that's what's going to happen, that Punk and his crew is going to be on one show and the Elite and their crew are going to be on the other show, and there'll be people obviously going back and forth in between, because there's a lot of people who don't like CM Punk in AEW, but there are a lot of people who do like CM Punk in AEW. So this is probably the temporary solution to that until everybody can grow up and stop acting like children and realize that there have been far worse incidents in the past, and rosters have gotten along with those without splitting them up into 2 shows. But that being said, we had a bunch of other stuff on this night on AEW Dynamite as well. As far as matches, you opened up with Claudio Castagnoli against Rey Fenix. Rey Fenix and Pentagon are the Ring of Honor Tag Team Champions, and Claudio is the Ring of Honor World Heavyweight Champion, and kind of a double jeopardy match where whoever won would get a shot at the other's championship. Claudio did win this match, which was just a great opening match, and another one of these pairings that I never thought about before, and now that I've seen it, I want to see more of Claudio and Rey Fenix going after each other. And we are going to get more because Claudio won the match, so him and presumably Wheeler Yuta are going to be challenging for the Ring of Honor Tag Team Championships sometime in the near future. Another highlight match on the card was Anna Jay taking on the Dark, the Mysterious, also referred to as a witch, a person whose presentation is off the chart. Julia Hart her entrance is that's sizzle on the steak. The steak still needs to be cooked a little bit more because her in-ring still needs some work. There were some continuity things and timing things and a few weird things that happened in the match. But those are nitpicks, but at the same time, she's not that fluid right now in the ring, and that's just going to take time. But I think with time and her getting in more reps, more ring time, more matches like this, Julia Hart is going to, if everything goes right, she could be a huge star, not only in AEW, but in the wrestling business in general. That whole persona with her and the House of Black is just amazing. Speaking of the House of Black, they also had a match defending their trios championships in their new house rules, which essentially they took some New Japan rules, a 20 count outside the ring. They also have a rule of no rope breaks, so you can't, if you're in a submission, you can't get a rope break to get out of it, or somebody doesn't have to let up on you if you're on the ropes. And a bunch of other things. Disqualifications are more severe, and it's not going to be so easy to get away with stuff in the House of Black match for DQ. But there is the final stipulation, which the opposing team, because Buddy Matthews said that, we need fairness in the world. And so the opposing team can offer their own stipulation. Now, best friends or best amigos, they were in a backstage interview with Renee and Orange Cassidy. Orange Cassidy's all beat up from the match he had earlier that I'll talk about. But they forgot what the rules were, that they could put a stipulation. So Chuck and Trent just kind of go, well, no witches at ringside. So Julia's barred from ringside, whatever. The match was interesting because they did dim the lights. And they dimmed the lights in a way where it wasn't like, like Kane back in the day or The Fiend in more recent times. They basically just lit it like old school wrestling from the 80s and the 70s, where the lighting back then, if you're a young fan who've never watched a live match that was lit old school, that's what it was. Every light is on the ring. The ring is very well lit, but outside the ring and the crowd is not lit at all. In fact, that didn't start becoming a thing until really the mid 80s. Vince and WWF very much speared that because they started lighting the rest of the crowd to their advantage, to show how many people were there, to kind of build on the spectacle of it instead of just focusing on the wrestling, which is why I always laugh when people talk about how wrestling's supposed to be done. I'm like, wrestling's been done so many different ways and has been successful in a lot of different ways. And you don't have to light the crowd all the time. Back in the day, they didn't even light the crowd. So you weren't worried about, it wasn't a status thing back in those times to worry about how many people were in the arena. I mean, that was a thing between promoters. But as far as the fans were concerned, you couldn't tell most of those shows before like the mid 80s. You couldn't tell, you could hear it, but you couldn't tell by looking at the shows if there were 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people at certain shows. So that was a nice little touch. For my old school soul, really enjoyed that. The House of Black did win that match just because the Best Friends were not prepared for it. But Bandito was a big standout in that one. And so, of course, as always, is Brody King. I did mention Orange Cassidy. He defended his international. There's a lot on the show. He defended the international championship against Daniel Garcia, and what was another great match on the show. There were basically 4 really good matches on the show, including what I would consider definitely a match of the year contender at the end of the show. Some other things that happened. We are going to have the Outcast taking on Sheeta and Britt Baker and the AEW Women's Champion Jamie Hayter in a 6-man next week. Roderick Strong challenged Chris Jericho to a no-holds-barred match. But Roderick Strong, who went to lawyers to get the JAS banned from the building because Jericho went to lawyers and got Adam Cole banned from the arena next week. So we're not going to see Adam Cole for a while. I think I kind of like that stipulation because it's kind of letting him kind of take it easy. Because again, the guy's coming back from some major concussions. You don't want to throw him in there and have him wrestling like Orange Cassidy is, wrestling 2 or 3 times a week in these hard matches and getting worn down. You want to kind of, spread out Adam Cole and his travel and his appearances until you're confident that he's back in ring shape, wrestling shape, that he can handle all that stuff. And of course, there was the promos during the night. The Four Pillars, who will be main eventing Double or Nothing coming up at the end of the month. I thought this was very well done. This is stuff that I always, when AEW does it, they do it really well, and I keep encouraging them to do more of these character profiles, is what I would call them. And they did one for each of the Four Pillars. MJF was the first one. His was hilarious as always. We also got one from Jungle Boy and from Darby Allin and from Sammy Guevara. And the two interesting things about this is that the other pillars, they all had their mentors in the video. So Sammy had Jericho putting him over. Sting was putting over Darby. And the interesting one was Jungle Boy because he just got out of a feud with Christian Cage, but they did have Christian Cage begrudgingly giving Jack Perry some praise, saying that, there was a reason why I linked up with him, because I think he was the most talented of the Four Pillars. And if he gets his head out of his ass, he could probably be AEW World Champion. I would have to agree with that. So that was really cool. It was really well done. Darby's was great. Sammy's kind of playing up more on the Sammy Guevara we've seen on the All Access show as opposed to on Dynamite. So a little bit more of a sympathetic character than what he's known for in AEW. Christian Cage also proved why he's one of the most hated men in all of wrestling. His heat is right up there with Dominic Mysterio over in WWE. And he got to Detroit and ran down Detroit. And Detroit was so angry at Christian, they chanted everything they possibly could, booed this man as much as they possibly could, said Edge was better to him. And not only that, Christian Cage he wasn't happy with that. He had to go another step too far with saying, well, I'm not going to go into, the daddy issues, because everybody's got daddy issues in AEW, but I'm not going to go into Wardlow's, not because I'm a good guy, but because Wardlow's father wasn't famous and nobody cares. That's classy. And then he went on to talk about Arn Anderson's son and how Arn Anderson had the son he always wanted in Warlow or something to that effect. And he actually has a son, Brock, in AEW that he's no longer mentoring. And that was a little too close to home because Arn Anderson recently did lose one of his sons in real life. So a bit iffy with that one. A much better or less cringy interview segment happened when FTR came out and they were confronted with the TNA coalition, as I guess we're calling them. And that this whole thing, I've said it on paper, FTR, Jeff Jarrett, Satnam Singh, and Jay Lethal, none of this seems like stuff that I would like run to go watch. But everything I have seen of this feud and rivalry is absolutely 20 times better than it has any right being. I'm actually really interested in this, and this was another new wrinkle. Last week we had the skit on the farm, and now this week we have FTR accepting the challenge from Jay Lethal with Jeff Jarrett, trying to celebrate it with a drink. Of course, Sanjay then spits the drink into Dax's face. Dax is blind, he can't see. But you got Mark Briscoe, who's also in the ring, who interjected this whole thing earlier to announce that he was going to be the special guest referee for their match at Double or Nothing for the tag titles, and which was really cool to see because Mark Briscoe, him and his brother not being in WWE and AEW before this year is actually kind of criminal, seeing how great that Mark Briscoe is on the mic, and you know he's got this stuff down for this kind of this level of a show. He's really good at it, and even using the wrong big words to talk about this. But as I said, Dax was blinded by the alcohol, by the drink that was spit in his face, and he grabbed and got Mark Briscoe, who was trying to keep the peace, and he pile drove Mark Briscoe. And then after realizing his mistake, Jeff Jarrett and Sanjay and Jay Lethal were all pointing at FTR and like, yeah, who's the carny now? Yeah, look what you did. Look what you did. This feud, this rivalry has been really good, and I am actually now looking forward to this tag team match because I think this tag team match between Team TNA versus FTR is actually going to be way more interesting. Yeah, we'd rather see FTR against other crews. We'd rather see him against the Acclaimed or against the Young Bucks or the House of Black or something like that. But I think for the interim, for right now, this rivalry, you're seeing why these guys have really great wrestling minds between Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal and Sanjay and Dax Harwood and other people involved in this. There's some really great wrestling minds in there, and they've booked this rivalry, this little mini feud for the tag titles expertly well. I can't complain about it. But this all culminated with a fantastic main event on a fantastic show. Poor Renee Young running around doing interviews everywhere. But the show ended with the main event, Jon Moxley taking on Kenny by God Omega in a steel cage. Here, this is Kenny Omega's first steel cage match because New Japan doesn't do too many of those. So he's in the cage. He didn't do the blood and guts match. So it's Kenny in the cage, and these two always perform good, except for when they're trying to have exploding rings. Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega is going to be a good time. And I saw live and in person their match at Full Gear, which was crazy and amazing. This match was just as crazy and as amazing. You had instances in this match that I'm going to remember, Jon Moxley reversing a turnbuckle into the head sequence by grabbing Kenny Omega and looking at the camera and ramming Omega's head into the camera and then kissing the camera afterward and leaving slobber and blood all over it, which the crowd popped for. The crowd also popped when they would show Danielson on the screen and he was on camera and he's just sitting there giggling and laughing at all this violence going on and everybody bleeding all over the place, barbed wire, steel chairs puncturing people's backs, gore everywhere. At one point in time when we came back from commercial break, Jon Moxley's got the hook of the turnbuckle in Omega's mouth pulling on it. Omega, of course they have to have glass. We can't just do thumbtacks. Thumbtacks is too passe now. We got to have broken shards of glass. So Moxley pulls out broken shards of glass. Of course, he winds up taking a bump on them when Omega drops him on his back onto the glass. A couple other moves were done on the glass. It was pretty hardcore stuff. And again, Omega is not known for hardcore stuff except when he's wrestling somebody like Jon Moxley. And it's a case where he kind of fits into that style, even though that is not the style he is known for. Omega, it's kind of like Shawn Michaels back in the day when Shawn Michaels would be in Hell in a Cell against The Undertaker. Michaels wasn't known to be a fighter, but he performed very well in that environment against a guy who was known to be an ass kicker. Same thing here with Kenny Omega. Of course, one of the biggest spots in the match was the V-trigger through Moxley with the cage side of the cage, a whole panel of the cage falling over, Omega almost crotching himself and making sure he doesn't have any kids, even though I don't think he's going to be having any kids, but who knows. But I don't think he has any kids. Omega doesn't have any kids, does he? I don't think so. But he got close to guaranteeing a impromptu vasectomy by landing very, very awkwardly between the ring and the cage, straddling it. Moxley gets back in the ring, takes advantage of this, and pulls out a screwdriver. And he's got the screwdriver. The screwdriver has been the theme of this whole feud. Don Callis gets in the ring, takes the screwdriver from Moxley. Omega hits the one-wing angel. 1-2, nope. Don Callis, of all people, breaks up the 3 count with a screwdriver to the head of Kenny Omega, literally stabbing him in the back, literally screwing him over. Moxley gets the pin after the match. Looks like Callis is going to hit him again. He drops the screwdriver, says something to Omega, couldn't quite make it out, and then he kissed Omega's forehead and then let him fall to the mat in a crumpled, bloody heap, and Jon Moxley wins the match. Now, I don't think that Don Callis, the way they played it off, is part of the Blackpool Combat Club, but Danielson's laughter kind of confuses that. After they have some videos afterwards showing people trying to get at Callis and to see what's going on. He's on the phone. He's like, I have no comment. He's running out of the building. So there's a lot more to the story than what we have seen. The Blackpool Combat Club getting another win over the Elite here. And Omega afterwards said, well, if you can't trust family, then who can you trust? So that's where we ended up at the end of AEW Dynamite. I thought this was from start to finish, this whole show was just a lot of fun. We've had a lot of really good shows in wrestling lately. That's why when you see all the complaining over the last couple of weeks, Wrestling Otaku New Japan was excellent. The WWE's Backlash show was excellent. And this episode of AEW Dynamite was excellent. You are spoiled for great wrestling as wrestling fans. So, and a lot of this stuff is either free or on a service that costs less than $10. So, what is there to complain about in the wrestling world? But there's a lot to be complained about in the wrestling world. A lot of people complaining in the wrestling world. We'll get to that later. But I think from right now, where it seems to be going, Takeshita's going to be kind of a wild card in this whole thing, where I think he's going to have to side with the Blackpool Combat Club in some way, shape, or form, because of Don Callis' request, but I don't think Takeshita is going to go full Combat Club, which is then we're going to have to lead to the thing with Omega and the Bucks getting Hangman back in the fold with them, and then a 5th person for an eventual Blood and Guts match, which is probably going to be all of the Blackpool Combat Club and Takeshita against the Elite and possibly Kota Ibushi. So I'm looking forward, if that's the direction they're going, I'm looking forward to it. Of course, it's not a guarantee. They can go any number of directions with this. But this has been some really good stuff on their part. For those of you who are not New Japan fans and don't know how deep the history goes with Kenny Omega and Don Callis, I mean, on screen, for those of us who watched New Japan in 2016, 17, 18, I mean, Don Callis was the color commentator, and he was putting Omega over all the time. And they have been an on-screen duo for a very, very long time now. And this, for us, it hits a little bit more than just people, just seeing what they've done in AEW. And of course, in real life, they go back many, many years because they actually are family. Omega's related to the Sheik and all this other stuff. So I thought this was, again, it was well done. A turn that we all knew was coming, but didn't quite know when it was coming. And I don't think any of us really expected it to happen on this night, but which made it all the much better. But I want to know what you guys thought about this. Let your voice be heard in the comment box below. Did you enjoy AEW Dynamite this week? Do you think they're going to be able to follow this up with next week's show, which, again, we're going to have a big announcement. We don't have a marquee match next week like we did this week with Moxley and Omega in a cage, but there's probably going to be good action. And we are, again, people forget about this with all the other talk about Collision and All In and Wembley Stadium. There is a pay-per-view coming up soon, Double or Nothing, that they are going to have to continue to set up matches for. So I'm excited about that. We're going to talk about all of this rumors about AEW's new TV deal coming up pretty soon. And we also have the rest over in WWE, the rest of the first round of the WWE Championship tournament. And Roman Reigns apparently is going to be on SmackDown Friday from what I saw earlier, but that's not confirmed yet. So we will see another great weekend of wrestling intrigue and news right here on the Rantin Review Pro Wrestling. Have a good day.